Welcome to the Workplace, Ninja Netherlands podcast, a series on Microsoft's modern workplace management.
So we're back, and now with a virtual user. Peter is on this recording as well, but he's virtual aligned within this podcast. So if you're on YouTube, you can see Peter on the back screen. Today we are gonna have a discussion on security baselines. Probably we have some experts on the table on this topic, but security baselines, Joost, what is it?
Yeah, you can approach it in different ways. So that's going to be fun.
What's the first way?
The easy one is to use the security baselines provided by Microsoft themselves. So you got the Windows baseline, Edge baseline, Defender baseline,
and Windows 365,
which is in preview.
Yeah.
And what's the difference with the security defaults?
So
the security defaults are in mainly in Azure AD, and the baselines Joost was referring to are purely focused on Windows and the applications.
Yeah, the security default is more the way of how you can create easy step for MFA and that kind of stuff, but
yeah.
Free version.
On the other hand, the Windows 11 OS is, you can always say, secure by default, because there are some hardware prerequisites on where you can only install Windows 11 in that case. So, of course, still the security baselines are needed, but I think that every version of Windows itself will be more and more secure when you install it out of the box.
Peter, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it is sort of secure by default. Of course, you always need to secure the operating system itself. But Kenneth is completely right that it's at least the most secure operating system Microsoft ever released. Together with the hardware, it's a good fit. But you still need to do a lot of things to really secure it, if you want to, of course.
Yeah.
And what is the difference between the security baselines that we have available in Intune, in other Microsoft environments, regarding NIST and other standards?
Well, maybe it's good to go back first to what the security baselines are, because they are a manufacturer provided best practice on how to configure your devices, and Microsoft already started with the security baselines in the AD world. So we still have those security baselines, and for Intune, a translation was made to some Intune specific settings, because if you still download the baseline, you will actually see a lot of settings which are related to how a device operates in an Active Directory environment. Well, and then when comparing those baselines to other standards like SIS or NIST or any other, then it becomes quite complex, because most of the settings are the same, but the description and the naming of the settings are different. So it's hard to make a translation between, for example, the Microsoft baselines and the SIS baselines or any other baselines. And I think it's, if I'm honest, I think it's too hard. And therefore, I decided to start using the manufacturer supplied baseline.
Yeah, I think the Microsoft way is fed by the community, the security community. It's a little bit based on NIST, SIS, all those baselines which are also fed by the community, but it's also based on the best practices of Microsoft. So it's not a real one-to-one comparison.
No,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but the most things that are covered in SIS and NIST and all the guidelines that are provided as a standard, more or less, are more or less covered in the security baselines from Microsoft. But on top of that, there are a few enhancements based on experiences from the field, from the experts, and so on.
Yeah, it's maybe an optimal mix between security and productivity. That's something
Yeah.
reflected in the security baselines provided by Microsoft, where maybe the other standards maybe have more tension towards security. And on the other hand, don't get me wrong, but the most secure device, of course, is a device on which you cannot log on and cannot work on. So it's always finding the right balance between productivity and security in that case.
And the manageability of the baseline, as you see how many times it will be updated, it's not on a monthly basis, the baseline. And if there's update, you have to move on if you want or not. So the manageability of the baseline, that's for me more a problem. So I know Francis was looking what's in the baseline, what's the difference, but the manageability of the baseline is not that real manageable. Except for small customers it can, but for enterprise I think it's not usable because it's not I think it's not manageable for an enterprise.
Yeah, and manageable in a way.
Manageable because it's not updated that much for a year, for example. It's not good for baseline. And if there's a new baseline, Microsoft is going to move you, or you have to move yourself. But maybe Kenneth has more experience on that, or Peter. But that's one of my pitfalls why I'm not using it.
Yeah, so Microsoft released the security baselines, and I think in the meantime maybe 2 or 3 iterations have been provided, where the last one was from November 2021. And November 2021 in security way of thinking is indeed very old. And it should, I totally agree that it should be updated more regularly to meet the standards, because, for example, the baseline is actually written for Windows 10. There's no security baseline for Windows 11. And there are many other perks which make the security baseline less and less usable. Yeah, I do agree on that point.
Can we tell something about if it's coming in the near future, and are they going to change it?
No, I don't think I can tell anything about that.
I don't have a clue, to be honest. I've asked the question. For instance, there's a new feature in 20H2 to enable admin account lockout, local admin account lockout, both on Windows 10 and Windows 11, and that's only manageable via GPO. So you also see new features coming only in the GPO world instead of in the modern world. And then even ask them ask Microsoft, hey, is this setting coming to some kind of baseline, or in the modern MDM world? No answer is given.
But we still see exceptions. For example, I've had that issue once with tattooing settings, where we actually set a BitLocker for removable drives. If you actually remove the setting again, which has 2 options, mainly configure or not configured, it will actually not remove the old setting. And therefore, we had to write a script to remove the registry file again. But again, these are exceptions, but it's not like we have an ideal situation where every setting works in the same way. Yeah. And that's that's our daily work, figuring out what those settings are, share that with each other by writing blogs about it and do stuff there. But again, it's not like there is no ideal solution yet. And I wonder, especially with the fast pace of things changing, if we will ever reach that point as well.
We have a few baselines. So let's see if we can peel it off and see what we need to do, what we need to use, and so on. Joost was mentioning a few of them. We have the Windows baseline, we have the Defender baseline, the Edge baseline, and there are a few others.
Yeah.
The Windows baseline. What is the most important thing there? You already said it's for Windows 10. It's not only for Windows 11. Are there any other things on?
Well, the Windows baseline is actually quite exhaustive, so it contains like more than 100 settings which are configured. So, and I don't think there's really like one important setting in there. It's more like a total of settings which provide the basic baseline for your security on the device. We need there's an interesting thing there though. The baseline is written for Windows 10 Enterprise, and that's important to notice, because there are some settings in there which will only work on Windows 10 Enterprise as well, and not on Windows 10 Pro when you're using Business Premium, for example. And that's basically it. I think it's a good starting point. Sometimes we have to remove some settings from there because it, for example, it contains some ASR rules.
Yeah,
but not all of them. So in our way of implementing it, we started with a security baseline. We came to the conclusion that we want to enable more ASR rules. So what we did is we actually removed them from the security baseline and created a new security config with only all the ASR rules in there.
Yeah. For example, I want to pin that a little bit out. Last time we talked about BitLocker. BitLocker can be set on a config policy in the security baseline. It can be set in settings catalog and also in a security policy and a device security policy. Is the security baseline, is that more or less a tool where we can see what we miss and what we do not have configured? Or is the security baseline also a configuration policy that will drift configuration into my machine as well? Because you already say we have some ASR rules. That ASR rules, we take that we set it on not configure in the security baseline, and we configure that in the security policies.
Yeah, so to give a more specific answer on the way that I do it, is I actually removed the security baselines and actually recreated all settings in the settings catalog. And therefore, I actually have more flexibility to apply that to customers. But again, having a good overview of what the settings are can help you to determine your own baseline as well. And you could decide to recreate the baseline in settings catalog as well nowadays.
Yeah. Peter, you're back. ASR.
Yeah, I got a slight remark also, and I'm fully supporting the way Kenneth is doing this, because recently I've seen a couple of issues at customers where we didn't not configure ASR as not configured, and for some reason there was a conflict of policies, and the conflict resolution or the conflict, how do you say that, reporting wasn't working that well in the Intune console. So if you were looking at the policy, there wasn't any conflict, but the vulnerability management in Defender for Endpoint was stating that the ASR rules were not configured anymore. And that was due to the fact that a feature of ASR was configured in the baseline, but also in the new policy, and they were conflicting. So it ended up not being configured anymore. So it's really important to have one source of truth.
Yeah.
And by using the baselines, it's easy to make a mistake or to configure something just a little bit different than the baseline is stating, and then you end up in issues.
Yeah, indeed. We have even seen, for example, that even though there are some settings, they are not always applicable on the system themselves. And therefore, it's always best that if you develop like a baseline, that you have other tooling available which can validate whether that baseline is actually applied on the system itself. So I'm always referring to tools like Hardening Kitty, where you actually have a PowerShell framework which you can run on a device and validate whether all the settings which are in the security baselines are actually applied as well. And it will actually give you good outputs. But don't rely on the fact that just setting something in the GUI is actually making the setting work on the device itself. It should be like a plan, do, check, act cycle that you always complete and test on a reference system on whether it's working and doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, so basically within the security baselines, there's an evaluation report to see what is your environment looks like.
But actually we can conclude that the reporting is in most cases not accurate.
I can tell a fun thing as well, because if you configure the ASR policies via the security baseline, you're not going to see them in the secure score. And in the security center, it will not show up. Yeah. So therefore, just a tip from me, create them in the endpoint security framework.
Yeah, and in this case, I was referring to it was working, and without a change in both policies, it stopped working. And apparently that was because of a platform change or a change in the back end of Intune in this case. Yeah. But it stopped working suddenly.
And is this regarding all security baselines? So is that also for the Defender Edge baseline, or is that only Windows security baseline? What were we talking about?
In this case, I only talk about ASR, but it woke me, made me aware of at least try to not use it anymore. Yeah. And like Kenneth said, rebuild your own baseline and make sure that you have one single truth of configuring.
Yeah, another good example is that Joost and I were talking about that last week, is the fact that we were trying to find some better way to notify users of Windows updates being installed. So we started looking in the settings catalog of what kind of settings are available there. So that's the way to look. And we found some possible settings making that possible, eventually ending up at a Microsoft article detailing some of the settings which are in the settings catalog, which you shouldn't set on new devices. So to give you an idea, there are settings there, they do something, but some settings are there's a CSP for it, but they are not effective on Windows 10 and Windows 11. They simply don't work, while they are in the settings catalog. So, and again, we are still talking about exceptions here, but it can become quite complex, quite fast if you're really doing deep dive and want to accomplish something using Intune and configuring settings.
So basically, Windows security baselines, not keep far away of them, but
use them to create your own baseline for it, because all the settings are in there, but you can create it on some places as well, like a settings catalog, recreate it and do it yourself and use those as guidelines.
And is that the same for, I'm making the same question, I think, but is that the same for the Edge baseline, for example?
Yeah, same. Yeah. So also there is a standard baseline for Microsoft Edge provided, but it's actually more related to the old Edge. You know, the old icon, the old Edge. Yeah. So there's actually a new security baseline for Edge, but you should recreate it into the settings catalog. And one way to do that is actually to import the security baseline, which you can download and use the group policy analysis set to do that. But actually, Jürgen Nielsen wrote a good blog about that. It actually misses two settings again, which he sets using a registry key. And the way he figured that out is by actually testing whether the settings were applied correctly on the endpoint device, coming to the conclusions that 2 settings which are in the baseline were not set correctly, and he decided to solve that with a PowerShell script, making those 2 settings using a PowerShell script eventually. But the point I'm trying to make is set it using Intune, always verify on the endpoint whether the settings are configured correctly, and modify if necessary. And it could be that maybe in 2 weeks Microsoft comes with a new update and all the settings work from the Intune natively. Then you should remove that PowerShell script and continue with all the settings native. And that's our work that we are doing, continuously looking at the environment and improve where possible.
Helping customers making good use of a modern workplace environment, Intune in this, and let's see what the security baselines can bring into the table, but don't use them in production. Let's see what is in the baseline and use them in your own configuration to make sure that everything is working and nothing is for getting like a special instructions like things that are not in the security baseline. And
then again, if you're a small company and you decided I bought Business Premium, for example, and having a security baseline is way better than having nothing. So the security baseline can, of course, help. But if you want to do more customizations at customers, I would actually use the tooling the way I can use it the best, of course, in that case.
Yeah, and another thing, if you are doing some security settings in the security baselines, others in the security policies, in the endpoint security policies, you have the configuration policies, the basic policies that we talked in the last recording in this series. So there are lots of options that we have. Please keep them minimized as possible, in my opinion.
Yeah, and start migrating to settings catalog. There are many settings which you already have. They still do their work, but maybe they are not using settings catalog. So what I do is I actually create a new version of that policy because of the naming convention and the versioning in it. And the next version will actually be based on settings catalog. Yeah. And by doing that, actually all my policies today already have moved to settings catalog settings, and I don't have any old policies anymore in my environment.
And Peter, do we have security baselines for hybrid on-prem environment as well?
Hybrid on-prem environment, especially the AD baselines, of course. But if you have a hybrid environment, try to move over as much of the management to Intune, I guess. On the other hand, you always also have, you also have the how do you say that? The NIST. Is that from the U.S. military? You also have the NIST, the baselines from there. They have Intune baselines for their Windows 10, Windows 11. You can import them in Intune. So if you want to have military-grade security on your devices, then you can also use those baselines.
But if it's military, then if it's military, then it should be not connected to internet, I guess.
No, true, but in this world, I don't know.
But you're right about that. There are options. Many of those organizations provide the settings which you can set on a device. It will also heavily depend on what kind of company you are. Some companies have to, due to regulations, have to comply to a certain standard. Yeah, the best way to actually do that is to use that standard, import it into Intune if you have that available, and use that because then you have like also a complete check because you have implemented the standard. You're also compliant in that case.
But always understand what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because not click next, finish, but then comes in the application and it doesn't work. But you don't know why it's not working because of all the settings you don't understand. So for my opinion, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're doing NIST, you do SIS, you do the Microsoft baseline. As long as you understand what you're doing, it doesn't matter what you do. But don't do next finish, because it ends up with something which won't work, and then you get everybody admin, or that all kind of easy does it. Everybody domain admin. I saw it in my back in the days. Then if it's on domain admin, everything works. Now then you see all those old problems come back in the new version, because you don't know what's happening really.
Yeah, indeed. I have a good example of that, where we actually still require the use of basic authentication in the Windows Remote Management module for the Exchange PowerShell commands, where actually one of the admins at my customer actually ran into that issue and decided to modify the security baseline in such a way that this setting was set for everyone. While only 2 admins were actually needed access to that PowerShell module. And therefore, and I said that in the last meeting as well, it's better to work exception-based in this case, and not modify the whole security baseline because 2 users in your environment need an exception for that.
Yeah, because it's set in the security baseline, everyone gets that
Indeed,
specific piece of configuration.
Yeah, and also what Eric is saying, really try to understand what the setting is doing, and why we are actually setting it in the security baseline as well.
Yeah, and on top of that, make sure that every security piece of configuration is set in on one location, because if it's on 2 or more locations, you probably have some other issues that you are searching. If there is an issue, you're searching a lot of time into the right correction.
Yeah, you actually have an interesting point there, because preferably you would set it all in the configuration profiles within Intune.
Yep.
Were it not that Microsoft created the Endpoint Security node for a reason, mainly because of Airbag, where we actually say we have persons doing Intune and doing the configuration, where on the other hand we have the security team who has also a responsibility in Intune, but can only manage the security-related settings like endpoint encryption, antivirus, attack surface reduction, etc., where they decided to move that config to a whole different section in the Endpoint Manager admin center.
Yeah, it's Airbag. One of the reasons, and the second reason is the new agent for Defender for Endpoint, where all the configuration is connected to.
Indeed, because we can also manage the servers from there if they are connected to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. But again, sometimes choices are made which don't necessarily make the implementation easier to understand.
No, but on the other hand, if we put the security configuration in Endpoint Security, then it's all the security configuration is there.
Indeed.
Not in a second place. So keep all the configuration, not all the specific configuration like security in one place and all the other configuration in the settings catalog, for example.
Yeah.
And let's see if we can talk about the settings catalog next time.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
So, probably that will be available in about 2 weeks or so. Let's see if we can do that. Did we forget something, Joost?
We do not have anything in Kenneth's corner.
We don't have anything left for Kenneth this time.
No.
So let's see if we can make things happen for next time. Let's prepare something.
Yeah, we should.
Okay. Yeah, you guys should be better prepared for next time, guys. Yeah.
Always
a little bit disappointed.
We've got one for you.
Okay.
It's going to be something about MFA,
conditional
MFA. Access.
Yeah, cool.
And now we will do a very special recording about conditional access with the special guest Kenneth. But regarding the second recording that we have done about autopilot, Rudy will join us in a very special delivery podcast, I guess.
Yeah.
You have contact with him?
We did, and he proposed it himself via Twitter, so that's going to be a nice one as well. So
Cool.
Within this series, we will do a special recording about, I guess, TPM and all things that are going wrong in
troubleshooting.
Yeah, what will be very interesting to hear is because Rudy does a lot of troubleshooting and he has his methods to do the troubleshooting, of course, and therefore he can actually figure things out by actually reverse engineering a lot of things that he's seeing in the network traces and other stuff. So he spends a lot of time on that, and
not only on that.
Yeah, and he shares it with the world, and that's very interesting. Yeah.
So let's see if we can when we are next time when we are together and recording the next two ones. Let's see if we can invite him as well for a special recording about troubleshooting.
The special edition.
I think if you offer him beer, he will be glad to join. Yeah.
Let's do that. So thanks for recording now, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, retweet, post our socials, and also hit the notification bell on YouTube on all the podcast platform medias and so on. So follow us and don't miss the next recording. So see you then. Thank you for now.